I guess I'll intro it because I'm technically the host of this. So this is weird.
Technically.
I've never hosted anything. So, except for like house parties, you know. So, hey, this is our first installment of I don't know what we're calling it yet. I'm going to be really honest. Vanguard Conversations, or Derek talks to people that are smarter than him, which, you know, that's a very, very long list. But, yeah, we're here with Trevor Gordon Hall. Trevor Gordon Hall is a fingerstyle acoustic guitarist, a rather accomplished one, among many other things. Philosophy and religion major. You invented your own major in college, as I recall.
Yes, I did.
So we'll get further down the rabbit hole on those things, undoubtedly, because that's what we do. We've done a couple of breakfasts where we've ended up sitting in the booth at Energy Station for like 3 hours,
and we're looking at the clock like,
like, should we
has
order,
it been an hour? Should we order food?
Should we order lunch or should we go?
Right.
Like, because at that point we've digested breakfast. Right. So yeah, I feel like we're like-minded in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. We share a lot of common interests. And we talk a lot about what's the basic building blocks, the fundamentals of what's behind artistry, and whether that art is making music or building the microphones that record the music. So I'm going to start with a really simple question, which is, and my phone is right here, a little inside baseball. This is where all the questions are. So you're a well-known fingerstyle acoustic guitarist. For those of us in the audience, can you kind of tell us a little bit about what is fingerstyle acoustic guitar? I know putting definitions on art is a bit of a tricky business, and artists like resist that by nature.
Yes.
But do your best. Like, what's fingerstyle acoustic guitar? What separates it from other things?
I would say, and my wife always laughs at that because anytime an artist is interviewed, it's like they always like wiggle out of any definitions.
Yeah.
But what I love about the term fingerstyle is it's so broad, it can encompass so many things. Mm-hmm. And so my understanding of the fingerstyle, I don't think fingerstyle is a genre. I think it's a tradition. And what I mean by that is it really is the meeting place of so many different genres and styles of music. So early fingerstyle was incorporating some of the folk traditions and then some country picking traditions. And then there's classical in there. And Michael Hedges comes along and sort of reshuffles the whole deck of what everybody's playing with. And so it's termed fingerstyle because you're playing with your fingers and that's it. Everything else is really, you can bring into it what you want. So part of the Michael Hedges path in the fingerstyle tradition really was, I mean, he was listening to, I think he loved Pantera, you know, he loved Joni Mitchell, he loved the Beatles, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Bartok. He was listening
pretty
to
much all
everything.
the same genre there. Yeah.
It's all the same. It's all one thing, you know? And so I think there's something that's really just like open and really interested in all of the things that can come into fingerstyle, and it's in a solo context typically. Yeah. So that's the idea. Like all these different musical traditions come into a solo context. So you're physically playing the bass notes and the percussion and all the melody and harmony. So it's really exciting because right now fingerstyle is sort of like lumped into like TikTok clips of like people, you know, playing all kinds of crazy stuff. And I think that's a part of it. But there is this there's a depth in how the tradition goes. It's very rich. And so it's really open to anybody who wants to take what is your own personal narrative, the influences you've had growing up, and put it in a solo guitar context.
And that's the solo guitar context, the part that's really interesting to me, because it reminds me of stride piano, you know, where like, the pianist is going to play the entire band.
Yep.
And when I think of fingerstyle, I think of Don Ross and Andy McKee and guys that are doing so much of when we think of fingerstyle, we think of the percussive stuff that's going on and adding percussive elements while also doing all this other crazy stuff. Yep. But then you got guys like, his first name escapes me, Alex Anderson, who are playing the harp guitar, and that, you know, is adding another bit of it. You invented an instrument, the kalimbatar, where I don't want to oversimplify it, but you basically like super glued a kalimba to the back of your guitar, to your guitar soundboard. And there's this, I like that you called it a tradition, and that there's this, it makes it art in that you're constantly exploring the limitations of it. And there's not, we just talked about defining art and how difficult it is, but it feels like part of what makes fingerstyle acoustic guitar so interesting is that guys are doing this really unique stuff, and the kalimbatar was your thing, and then there's the harp guitar, and I think Andy plays harp guitar as well, doesn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Andy plays harp guitar, and harp guitar, goes back to the early 1900s, but who really brought a resurgence back to it was Michael Hedges. And so he was kind of the person who was just like, he called himself like a hunter-gatherer, like anything that's good in any genre, he's coming for it, and he's going to bring it back into his camp. And I love that sort of spirit of openness. And that is part of the whole fingerstyle tradition. I think that resonates with me the most ever since I was a little kid. It has allowed you to be very personal and bring who you are to it, as opposed to like, not that you can't in the classical tradition or in jazz traditions, of course, jazz, there's a whole lot of room for expression, and in classical, there is a whole lot of room for expression, but there are standards in a way. You learn these, and you play these in a certain way. And I think that's good. But something about fingerstyle was like, now write in a certain way after you've acquired some of this technique. And that's still the juice for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of what has become very popular with fingerstyle, or at least what gets a lot of plays on TikTok and the like, and I think you've done this as well, is when you cover a particular, a famous tune, a pop tune generally, and you cover it as a solo guitar. And, who did, I don't remember the Coldplay tune. Da 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 da. I think it was Andy McKee actually, but it's a tune from X and Y.
Okay.
Antoine
Dufour.
Yeah, Antoine Dufour.
Talk.
That's what it does.
Yeah.
It was Talk. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
That's
so
right.
much. Yeah.
I was trying to remember what.
So
he's brilliant.
Yeah. Another, speaking of, more giants in the genre, but you said something before that I think transitions this pretty well, which is I'm always interested in the journey that people take. In their musical, in just their musical life. And I'm kind of interested in where you started, what got you started on this. And then if we can flow that somehow into, without getting too deep in the rabbit hole, where you are now and where you're looking ahead to.
Sure.
I'm interested in what got you started in the fingerstyle journey and what's kept you there for however long you've been doing it.
Well, I think like at the core, when I thought about this so many times, and like it comes up in lots of interview format questions. How'd you get started? How'd you get interested? And I still come back to this moment that I just remember sitting at the piano. We had a piano in the house, and my mom very grudgingly played for church, and she didn't like it, but we did have a piano in the house, which was nice. And so I just remember sitting and experimenting and hearing music on the TV. From a movie, and then just figuring it out on the piano, and the connection between hearing something and processing it somehow and then locating it on an instrument did this whole feedback loop of excitement, inspiration. It was just a really interesting spark that was ignited in me. But I always felt like the way that piano was laid out never quite was intuitive or logical. And I know all music theory is based on that. And like, oh, you want to play a third, here it is. I know, like, I get it.
All Western music theory.
But I also don't get it,
Yeah.
So I begged my parents. This was around probably 6, 7, 8. Then I begged my parents to let me borrow a guitar from my neighbor. She let me borrow, which was very, very kind. And she actually gifted me that original guitar on my wedding day, which was pretty cool.
That's pretty neat.
Then I got another guitar, and I just felt like once I came to guitar, I was around age 10. That idea of hearing something and then searching for where it is on the instrument just felt more intuitive. It wasn't easier. I don't think anything's been easy for me. I'm just like obsessed with finding out. I'm obsessed with figuring out how to get it done. And I think I have like a real intense focus, but I do have to work at things all the time. So I think that started the initial wonder of music for me. And the music that was playing in the background of my life at that time was my mom always played Windham Hill records.
Okay.
Christopher Parkening, Phil Keaggy was a really, really massive influence. And of course, Will Ackerman, Michael Hedges, you loved piano player George Winston. So there was a lot of those textures going on. So I think I naturally gravitated towards those early forming years, my emotional awareness, my connection to music, and I think just my personal temperament. that was like a real kind of like cocktail for the start of my journey, you know? So I think fingerstyle resonated with me because it was so personal. You know, I had, you know, Phil Keaggy, VHS, learning, you know, like the learning programs, and watching him play a tune and where it came from. And he felt this, he had this experience, and that became a song. And I just remember as a kid feeling like, that is just the coolest thing ever. Like I could not imagine anything cooler than that. So I think I naturally came to the fingerstyle thing, in my life before I realized what it was. You know, I remember I have early memories of listening to Michael Hedges, and I know that other people have said this. I've heard in other interviews too, when they first hear Aerial Boundaries, they're like, "Ooh, what band is that?" You know, and as a kid, I didn't know that it was a solo guitar player. It was just a cool groove, you know. And then, you know, years later, studying it, like this guy's doing all of this at one time.
Doesn't it make your brain hurt when you?
It makes my brain hurt. Well, there's so many ways to dive into the Hedges path, the Hedges tradition, and there is like the extremely heady, intellectual, unbelievably innovative side in Aerial Boundaries. In I think there's some really interesting things in Taproot, like, but then you have this whole other dense side, which I think probably makes up, you know, the bulk of his catalog, which is just really, really good harmony, amazing melodies, really heartfelt, true to life. And so I was always drawn to that. I really, really love the technical stuff. And I've, you know, spent years studying all the intellectual stuff. And I've gone through, you know, the Hedges stuff and then, you know, all of the other players. But I've always loved the idea of what inspired Michael to play the way he played. Who was he listening to? And then chase that influence back. Like the idea of like, I've heard other artists talk about this, like to feel what they felt is more important than to just play what they played, you know?
Yeah.
So I think all of that, you know, a long answer to your question. That's how I started initially on the fingerstyle path. And I just feel like it's been wide enough for me to stay the whole time, because I feel like every new exploration I want, it's not restricted to, you must play 18th century classic, you know, like it's always been open. Yeah. And even though I studied all of that stuff, I never felt the pressure to have to, you know, drop everything and go deep into that well. It was always the Hedges tradition of like, I'm going to take this, and it, you know, he always talks about like, I'm just in this to get high, and I just love the buzz. Mm-hmm. And there's something about that I call one of my tunes "Chase the Chills." That's like the core of what it's about, you know.
Yeah, and that, I think you've described a lot of artist journeys about like when you first sit down at an instrument or you first hear a song. Yeah. And you're like, why does that make me feel that way? What is it about music that's this crazy universal human experience? And you specifically, it's so funny because as you were talking, I'm like, oh, like discovery is what drives you. Yeah. And part of why you like this genre is because, as you said, the path is so wide and the edges are so fuzzy. They're not so much guidelines or fences as just places on the map that haven't been explored yet in that genre. Totally. And that... discovery is what tickles your brain a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. So where are you now? What are you doing now? And where are you hoping to go?
Yeah. So right now I'm in this, I'm in an interesting era of, you know, a lot of fingerstyle for me. It takes a lot of the pieces that I'm exploring. It just takes years. I'm always writing way beyond my ability, and it takes me so much work to attempt the ideas I've committed to wanting to execute. Mm-hmm. You know, the last, I guess, 10 years, 12 years or so, it's been my compositional process is like, I'm writing the notation and the tab while I'm composing. So there's this like, and sometimes I'll put the guitar down and just go to writing, you know, I use Guitar Pro for good compositional software. And so sometimes to get away from the guitar shapes is helpful. So I like to do that. That's fun. But I started a project last year, and we've talked about this so much, you know, at our breakfasts. I've had a few singles that have come out, but I'm really excited to explore this new approach where I would give myself only 1 hour. And in that 1 hour, I have to come up with the ideas, and I have to just find something that feels true in that amount of time, and then sort of take a stab at an arrangement. Mm-hmm. And what is my compositional sense in real time, as opposed to like months and months and months. Mm-hmm. And I put myself in a very uncomfortable space of playing nylon string guitar, which is a totally different touch, feel. Everything is different about nylon string guitar. And then last year, just going through therapy and really diving into some of my own patterns. We've had so many conversations about that. I just think it's healthy for me to find an outlet for these things. And so what theme I was sort of thinking about at the time, searching for a couple of riffs that feel true. Then I would just sit down and that's it. Whatever it is within that hour, that's it. And I would try to record it soon after. So that's kind of a fun, different approach. I guess it still falls under fingerstyle, but again, because fingerstyle, as you said, it's so broad, the edges are so fuzzy, that feels to the core of what I think the tradition is about, which is like a real introspection and discovery,
Yeah.
There's a great author that said, I don't write to express, I write to discover. And there's something about that that's like, you really do have to have quite a lot of introspection. And I think a lot of solo guitar players tend to be on the introverted side, just nature of, playing. Not that you don't play with bands, a solo instrument, So I think just a healthy understanding of asking those questions. Who are you? Why do you feel you're here? What kind of person you want to be in the world? And all of those can come to a head in good moments of reflection and bad moments of reflection. And I think all of that is welcome. And so this is the first time in my life I've ever tried to do all of that in a time frame. So to not just give myself, because months and months gives you I just explore tons of options.
Yeah.
My goal
it's
I need to make decisions
by analysis, right?
I need to make decisions.
It's exactly. Like I think as a young engineer, and I've talked to a lot of other people that have had this problem where there's so many options. You've downloaded a bunch of cracked plugin bundles or whatever as a college student because you couldn't afford them. I don't know. This is just theoretical. Okay. So
I didn't know how to do that. So I didn't,
But you've got all these plugins, you've got 80 different compressors and you're like, which one do I want to use? And there's something very freeing about limiting yourself. It's paradoxical, but it's like form within poetry, right? Yeah. Like having to write within a form suddenly makes it so that because you have less creative options, it frees up your mind to focus on being creative within that space. And that's kind of what you've done is like, it's a form of, it's form poetry in a way for songwriting is I'm going to do this in an hour.
Yep.
There's a guy I follow who does hilarious sketches on Instagram. His name's Jordan. I want to say Burchell, but it could be Burchell. Sorry, Jordan. Okay. And one of the things he's doing is doing a song demo every day and then like putting it on Instagram, writing a song every day.
That's
and
cool.
Just getting better at the process by doing, right? We were just talking about before we started recording how Michael Jordan was like, oh, I just missed more shots than anybody else. It's just like the term failing up, but like in a positive context of all growth is failure and experimentation and trial and error. So I really like that idea of putting yourself in this box and in a way that creating a freedom of its own.
It's funny because, as we started at the beginning of the conversation, the titles of like when you ask an artist and everyone, you want to squish your way out of being confined and just realizing how healthy that can be when you have those, self-imposed restrictions. You're right. There is sort of a freedom within that. And I always liken it to like, if you want to go on a road trip with a friend, you can have everything ready. The car, the gas tank's on full and like, okay, where do you want to go? Like,
I don't know.
Yeah. But if all right, this is where we have to be and we can stop along the way, then exactly you can form, a road trip. And so I think sometimes that's healthy to like not just look at a blank canvas, but start with an outline or at least an impression or a color or a mood and allow yourself to go in that direction. There's an artist, I think his name is Mark Tansey. I heard a lecture on this years ago and he does really, really interesting artwork, but he has this giant wheel. And it has different rings of his interests on it. So when he spins it, it will go in different directions. So it'll be like, impressionist style. Like one ring is like all of the different styles of art. And he's mastered all of these. Another ring is like, what are his philosophical interests? Another would be like a current event. And so he just spins it and then it will line up, like impressionist, existentialist, global, whatever. And so like
Yeah.
that is what he works on that day. And so there's something that's like, is that a limitation or is that actually freedom? It doesn't that expand your ability more when you have such a defined
I think it can be
for?
both.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like both of those things can be true. It can be a limitation, and that limitation can be a form of freedom.
Yeah.
Because it gives you impetus, right? It gives you this impulse of moving forward and like, okay, now you have something to focus on.
Yeah.
So I think that you were talking about focus earlier, and like that's a struggle for a lot of people, particularly in 2024, the year of our Lord, is maintaining focus on one thing and knowing what that focus needs to be.
I know.
So before I forget, what's the name of the album that's coming out? Your Now One String album. What's the name of some of the tunes so that people can go look them up on Spotify,
you got it.
Apple Music, any of these places that pay you absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that's right. So the very first single that came out was called This Moment, This Breath, This Melody. And that was just that morning. That's what I needed. That riff was just like black out everything else and just, what is this feeling, you know? The next one that came out was Presence, Not Perfection, which is a really big thing, you know, so just little nuggets, lessons. And then with each single that has come out, you know, I released the tabs and like the tutorial. But I find it interesting. I've been just writing short little essays, just, you know, a couple paragraphs about why this concept resonates with me. And I've been getting messages from people who have sort of like, because I'm doing these once a month, they've sort of taken these as their personal reflections for that month, and they're playing the song. And so this is the first time that I've had music that I feel like is completely participatory. You know, I want someone to get inside the concept for themselves while they're playing it. And none of the pieces are insanely challenging because it's not meant to be what is technically, you know, to me, it wasn't what is technical. It's what is true. And so the next one coming out is called It Will Not Always Be Winter, which is just another, we can dive in. Each of these has like a whole offshoot.
Yeah, I feel like we could spend an hour on just diving into the titles and what they mean.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that leads me into another question that's on my list, which is, you know, we had mentioned it before, you were a philosophy and religion major in university. I remember coming into your studio the first time and seeing some of your books, seeing Marcus Aurelius and seeing, you know, and I'm going, oh, okay, into Stoicism. And we talked a little bit about philosophy. And then I realized, oh my goodness, you're a philosophy major. Whereas I went in for a semester and I was like, oh, philosophy majors are insufferable. I don't want to be one of these. And it drove me crazy to be around them. You know? But I want to ask you about like how your, and you've already started talking about it, how your interest in philosophy has informed your art. And it seems like for this album in particular, it really has.
Yeah. I think that, you know, I always go back to like the word philosophy, you know, if you break it down where the root words are, it really is the love of wisdom. And that's different than just, you know, the acquiring of knowledge, which can feel like that's where a lot of the philosophy or theology students go to. It's like, how do you structure an argument to, demolish somebody else to impress a female in the room or something, you know, or you know, vice versa. And I feel like a lot of the banter that can happen. I had really, really great friends and really good conversations in college, but I can see how it can lean that way. And I was always just obsessed with, how does this make you, like, I don't understand Heidegger when I read him. It is like insanely difficult.
I don't know if anybody does, but there's enough people that pretend to and make a living.
But I think there are a few that do, and I like to read them. So I realized early on that I'm not very good with all of the primary sources, you know, of these actual thinkers. But I like to read them because I feel like I get some sort of brain buzz. There's a heightened excitement about when I can feel my brain learning something, and I've always taken that feeling to the guitar. So when I was in school, I'm, you know, writing this, you know, 40-page paper on the concept of God in all of the different, you know, ancient philosophies. And that's so fascinating to me. But then that would always ignite me to pick up my guitar and start writing. So there's always been this sort of interconnect of like the brain buzz, connect it to music. And then there was this sort of stay curious, and that sort of would bring about certain ideas that I'd be interested in exploring. So, and I know that's all of that sounds very abstract, but my interest in philosophy always comes down to something that's personal and helps me feel like that's interesting. I need to chew on that for a little while. I love the physical sensation of reflection, and I love the sensation of expression, of putting that into something. And so that remains a mystery to me, exactly how that works structurally. But I just know that as that I've been out of college, I graduated in 07. So it's like, oh my gosh, I'm getting old. That pattern that I set up there has still been with me. My following the curiosity wherever it leads, and just seeing what happens, trying things, not being afraid of new ideas, trying on a different, a way of thinking for a little while, and just to see the world through that perspective. Same thing happens with, diving into different traditions in guitar. And so to me, it's always been interconnected, and it's always been very personal. I'm interested in trying to figure out who was Trevor growing up, who is Trevor now, and what kind of person do I want to be. The paradigm of Richard Rohr talks about like the construction, the deconstruction, and the reconstruction of your life. How did you grow up? Really understanding your cultural upbringing, your religious upbringing, and really processing, really understanding what you have to leave and what you need to bring with you. The deconstructing part, so the construction, the deconstruction, and then getting into the reconstruction, what kind of person you want to be in the world. And all of that is so fascinating to me. And I'm very, very hard on myself, but I think that has like really forced the continual reflection. And then it always forces me to do an outlet somewhere musically. And so, like some of my challenges with anxiety and mental health, I really poured this nylon string project. I really wanted to explore those concepts in a different way than just staying in my head. I wanted to get them in the body, into something else.
Because music is an expression. It's a form of conversation, right?
Yeah.
And it's an outlet for you.
And you discover that sometimes what has been plaguing you, this like ongoing narrative in the background of your mind, sometimes when you just hit pause and be like, that's not true at all. And I found that I've had those moments when I'm just searching for something on the fretboard that feels that's trying to just resonate with what I'm feeling. And I just feel like it can help bring me out of that ongoing tape in the back of my mind. I did a project partnered with a neuropsychologist, and right now it's a study at a university. I'm trying to innovate this way of taking different frequencies, tempo, and pitch, and manipulate those in a certain way that can enhance focus or relaxation. And again, like that's another project that's kind of in the wings I've been working on, but that was born out of, I'm going to sit down. At first it wasn't any guitar. It was just like synthesizers, and just trying to explore, like, I'm feeling something and I really, really want to either find a resonating sound that feels true, or something that will help me feel just a little bit of relief. It's like, again, all of it is whatever goes on in the storm in the mind. How can I get that out? And I think that's such a healthy thing. So the long answers to your questions, but like that is so important. Like philosophy, allows you to stay aware of the great conversation, as I say, the big picture questions, and then music allows me to make that personal. And I think that interconnection, I can't imagine not spending the rest of my life exploring that.
That's I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but it's Aristotle's eudaimonia.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
right.
The blossoming of, or the flowering, I guess. The direct translation is difficult, but I think that I really like the idea of music somehow being an outlet for those thoughts.
Yeah.
And thoughts and feelings are interwoven, right? Totally, inextricably. I'm a very much an intellectualizer of my feelings. So I'm like, I try and not feel them sometimes. Right. I try and think them. But what you've done is taken the thought, and philosophy is so much, entwined with the intellectual side of it often. And you've allowed music to become the feeling part of philosophy that I think is sometimes missing from philosophy. And because it's not a natural part of it, but because we view philosophy as so intellectual that we fail to miss the practical part of it as humans, which is we are emotional beings.
Totally.
So,
and to negate that part, I always feel like the rational part of the human being, that is the shallow side of the pool. And man, it goes like the rational part of humanity has created an insane amount of progress and destruction as well. But all of the other human stuff on the deep end of the pool, that's when you get into the emotions and your upbringing and what would drive you towards certain arguments or worldviews and all of that. It's like I just felt like when I was dipping my toe into the pool at university, I was like realizing how deep this thing can go. And I think that's why I am drawn to the Stoics and some of the existentialists and some that are more like the lived philosophy as opposed to debating, the true meaning of a word for 2 centuries and, continental, which that stuff is interesting too. But, so I tune in and out of that conversation from time to time. But again, the hunter-gatherer model from Michael Hedges, I go in for the buzz, I get what I feel like I need, and I'm out. I'm back to my own thing,
Yeah. It's not a bad way to do it, because otherwise you can get stuck swimming in this vast sea of ideas and knowledge that you can't ever absorb all of it.
Totally.
You can't ever read all of it, let alone like internalize it and then use it for your own thing. So you got to take the things that resonate the most and be efficient with it. It really quickly, if you had to pick a philosopher right now that you're really enjoying, what's somebody who really resonates with you right now? Just one. Otherwise we'll be here forever.
Well, I guess I go back to this, like the Stoics, but like I just love the clarity of Marcus Aurelius. Man, I like, he was the Roman emperor, and he's he was very influenced by it was Epictetus, who I believe was a slave. And so what's so interesting is that like the emperor seeing the wisdom, it was just really cool how open he was, and the structure of society would not have allowed that. But because Stoicism was the form of thinking that it was, it was very interesting that he could see, the wisdom in what would be, the lower classes in Roman, society. And I don't know, there's just a clarity and when those are primary sources that anybody can read and really just get a sort of mental palate cleanse.
It's very relatable, and it's very like where we were just talking about Heidegger being incredibly dense,
and it's German. So I know
there's a translation, right?
It happens with Aurelius too, but I don't know. I don't know those ancient languages, so I hope I'm reading a good translation. But
it feels like reading Hemingway versus reading Thoreau, where Hemingway was about economy of words and simple sentences. And how can we strip this down to its bare minimal? And then like Thoreau, I'm reading Thoreau right now. I'm reading Walden. And long flowing paragraph. He would have failed English class today because everything was a run-on sentence. And there's like 6 thoughts within one sentence. It's very difficult to read. So Marcus Aurelius is a good one for dipping your toe into philosophy and feeling like you're not going to get lost in the wilderness immediately. Meditations is the big
Meditations
one, right?
is great. I love in college I got really, really into Thomas Merton, which he was a monk, and so he not quite not a philosopher, but he was like just a real interested in spirituality. He was a Trappist monk, but he was never confined to just his own tradition. He was very open to other traditions. And at the end of his life, he actually, engaged in talks with the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh. And he was kind of like trying to bridge some of the real, the connection between some of the Zen traditions and the ancient Catholic spirituality. And so I don't know. I always love the people who are looking at the inroads and opportunities. I'm a peacemaker by temperament, so I like that, But he was another one that was really big. But you said one, so I'll stop it. And I know Merton is not considered a philosopher, but
I don't. Everybody's a philosopher. It's ingrained in all of us. So we've talked about this before. I'm going to take a hard left, lest we fall down the philosophy rabbit hole for the next 3 hours, as we usually do. So I know we talked about it before, but like artists in the modern era of music making have to wear an insane number of hats. We were just talking about how you've learned how to do film editing and stuff. You record yourself, you notate, you play, you do so many things. So with that being said, what do you think is a skill that you have as an artist that you think is a really essential skill that you do really well that that other artists, I think, struggle with commonly? And how do you achieve that? Like, what are the steps you took to form that habit and form that skill?
That's a really, really good question. I don't know if it's like specifically a skill. I think maybe this is something that I was born with or part of my upbringing, but like, I think being curious. I think being curious is good. I had absolutely zero understanding of video and video editing, and I was in enough video shoots where I was like just picking up different things here and there, and I realized when a certain technique happened, like, I love the way that looks. What is that, you know? So when it came to my own video editing, I tried to just like channel another sort of like, I'm curious and searching for the brain buzz in this. While I'm editing this video, can this be part of my craft as well? So I think that's another, like, the integration and the curiosity.
Well, and video is so important now because every platform wants you to be doing vertical video in order to get reach. And it's no longer about your followers. It's about gaming the algorithm. So like being able, I really like that you're able to take something, because I was just talking about this the other day with my mic tech, because Cade was learning the new engraving laser we got for the office. And Cade said, "Oh, I was scared of it when we got it. I didn't want to start because it just felt like so big and so, you know." But being able to reframe it as an opportunity for like, where can I find joy and interest in this challenge of learning something new? And like, things are progressing so fast now technologically that we're going to have to constantly be learning something new. Just before this, we're talking about how you have to game the algorithm and how Instagram and Facebook and TikTok are all constantly changing what they're looking for.
Right.
And so you constantly have to be relearning that. And so being able to pick up a new skill and not being afraid of picking up the new skill. And I think one thing you do really well, and we can get into it a little bit, is you manage your time well to the point where you will go, okay, I'm going to create all my content for this month. So if I have to release 3 vertical videos a week, then I need to make 12 vertical videos. And I'm going to spend today doing that, or today shooting and tomorrow editing. And I don't know if you time block or like what's your time management skill, but you manage to be doing all these things. You've got your nylon string project coming out. You've got classes that you teach. You've got the Triplicity project, which we haven't even talked about yet. We'll get there, I promise. You've got so many things going on. How do you, I feel like you juggle that really well. And I'm curious if you have any tips of, you know, because every artist is doing that. Every artist is like, I got to have multiple income streams, and, you know, and so how do you juggle that?
That's, thank you for that. I feel like, I have a sort of bi-weekly, you know, or every 3 weeks, meeting with a couple of good guitar player friends, Manelli Jamal and Ryan Judd. And they're both other, you know, guitar players in the scene. And both of those guys are just extremely, extremely smart. We're always talking about efficiencies and workflow, as well as, you know, some of the new tools, what to ignore, what to not. There's just but we also will have just really good conversations about life and where these songs come from. And Manelli is one of the people. I met Manelli. We did a tour together in 2012 with our other friend Van Larkins, and so we you know have been in each other's lives for, you know, I guess 12 years now. But he's just always about like, what is the optimal way to work? And I remember one of those sessions just feeling like, when you sit down to do the post, you're not just hitting upload. You have to have created the content initially. You have to have thought through what that is. And then you sit there and you're like, oh, I want to be clever. What's, you know, and what are the hashtags? I'm like, the mental drainage that it takes to make a post a day was just killing me. And so for a while, my Instagram, it was like, I would start on Monday with a new video I wanted to record. And my goal was to work on that. And then Thursday I would film it. Friday I would post. And that was kind of just like, you know, an old riff from an old tune. It was just like part of my workflow, you know?
Yeah.
But now they want you to post more and all of this. And so, yeah.
Yes, they do.
Manelli kind of like turned me on to the idea, was just so smart of just like batching content. So you sit down and, you know, I have, you know, the cameras here. I have kind of like a moving angle. I make a plan and I have like a spreadsheet of all the videos that I would hope to have done, and if I can record, hundreds of them, then the moment of uploading, I don't have to worry about what it is. I can sort of curate how I want those to go. And then if I have enough of those, then it's okay if I repost something in a year, because it's not like I'm reposting, so there's enough of a variety. But the most important thing that he turned me on to was just the scheduling of the posts. So I use like the later.com tool.
So you use Later. Okay.
Yeah. It's not perfect. Like there's quirky things about it. And
they're constantly changing the APIs at all these different places. And so sometimes it's like, the TikTok one doesn't do this anymore.
Right.
for a couple days till we figure this out.
But again, like I'm trying to go back to like, what is the point of me doing this? Is my point to try to quote unquote go viral? Is my point to market, to promote? I think on my, on rainy Monday mornings, maybe that can creep into my mind, but I do think at the core, my motivation is just, I like the interaction. I like the idea of posting a section of a song that feels like it is true to me, and then somebody else resonating with that, and I'll get a DM saying like, hey man, I really appreciated this, what I needed today. And so I really try to make sure that like I can go down the rabbit hole of they want this now. And sometimes I'll like tweak some of the video edits when I'm batching content to like, let's try this. But in general, my thinking is more, can I be consistent? Can I give a variety? Now that the followers we've all gained on all the platforms mean nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
It's pushed a giant reset button on everything. So somebody who started guitar last week, I get messages from people saying like, why are you copying the kalimba on the guitar? And I'm like, okay, like, let's Google this for a second. I've been doing this for, a few more years. And so part of me is like, this is actually a new chance to introduce what is my thing and make new connections. And so I'm trying to just be optimistic about that.
That's a good reframing.
On my best days, that's what I do. But that's not every day. But the idea of making a bunch of content, scheduling it out, and then at that moment I can like choose what I want to say with each of those. Then, like as we're talking, I think something is going to be posted and I'm not looking at it. And I try to force myself to not look at it until, if I have a couple minutes, I'll respond to some of the comments. But I feel like that it's removed. Like if you're not active on those platforms, the guilt in your mind of you should be, it takes up more mental real estate than just batching and posting. And then it's gone. It's not in my mind. It doesn't suck my day,
And that's a challenge for me is I've always wanted to Monday morning schedule out every one of my social posts.
Right.
And I never do it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time I'm creating the content as I go. Yeah. And that is, for the videos I've been doing lately, because I'm not good at it. Well, I appreciate that, but I'm not good at, this is all new to me. So instead of becoming habit, and that Instagram editor can suck sometimes.
I haven't used it. I'm so used to just the workflow, film it in Final Cut, and then
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm just going to do it on my phone. And so I film everything and then I edit it and then I post it. And, some of those can take like 2-3 hours. And I'm that's like
opportunity cost, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's so much of my work day. And it's useful. And it's important for the ugly part of business, which is having to get marketing and have people know what you're doing and stuff like that. But it's just, you're right. The mental real estate it takes up. I really like that term because there is a finite amount of mental capacity we have. And as humans, we can focus on one thing at a time. Yep. And if we switch too much, it's really unhealthy for our brain.
Yeah.
So that's something I really, really like, the batch posting. And you really have, like you said, you're still trying to get better at it, but you become so efficient, and efficiency is part of the wearing of those hats. And part of efficiency is, okay, today I'm going to focus all my energy on this thing that is then going to pay dividends through this month. So there's a long-term focus there. And then tomorrow I can focus on this other thing and I can be fully present with it instead of thinking about, well, I also need to do this Instagram post and respond to these 3 emails and this and that and this.
Right.
And that's where time blocking, I tried time blocking and I fell out of the habit. And being, you're the CEO of Trevor Gordon Hall. Yeah. I'm the CEO of Vanguard Audio Labs. And that means that fires come out that you have a kid too. I don't even have a kid that I have to worry about. That, that adds a whole new level of chaos to your life and your schedule. So how do you keep all that, moving? How do you keep the momentum moving forward when all those chaotic elements get introduced? I mean,
so good. I mean,
that might be a meaning of life type question where there isn't an answer, but
I think it's a question. I don't know how you answer it, but continually ask it. You continually deepen it. But I have found in general to do your deep work as early as possible. So like, I think it's Tim Ferriss has the whole like make before you manage. There's something about making
That's
sure
one of your Post-its up there.
Is it? Yeah.
I took a photo of your Post-its while you were in the house, and I was like, I'm stealing some of that for myself.
Yeah. They're good questions. Now I just have to actually ask them routinely. But just that idea of making sure that you don't start, and we're all guilty of this, especially if you use your phone as your alarm clock. Like, it's just easy to like immediately go, and when I'm in my most like optimized schedule, I think I'm just juggling a lot of things right now, so I'm trying to stay efficient. But I think what I used to do, and I need to get back to, was I do like the early mornings. I do like to feel like I've gotten good, substantive, proactive work done as early in the morning as possible. And then the rest of the day I can deal with the reactive things, I like that, and there was some times where it's like my daughter gets off the bus at 4. So I will start doing my emails at 3:15, like force myself, like that's the chunk, but I'm not going to start the mental brain work until later. And I know that puts me later into responding to people on emails, and that can be annoying. And I do the same thing with text. Like sometimes I have to just block it off. And I know some of my friends are like, dude, but I'm like, part of how I have to put it down in order to do other things. Yeah. And so,
well, there's so much science behind when you change focus.
Yeah.
And then you go back to what you were doing. It takes time for you to re-get that momentum. Like everybody's been in that state where you've done an hour of work, but it feels like you've done 8 hours of work because you were focused enough in that moment to have the momentum to be so much more efficient and effective. Yeah. As opposed to, if I'm, to talk to my audience working on a mix or whatever, and then I stop and I make a coffee and I check my phone. Then before I know it, 30 minutes is gone and I go back to the mix. I have to regain that momentum because I've stopped. It's like that acceleration. I've now taken all that inertia I've had and thrown it out the door. Yeah. So I really like that, and it makes me want to start try time blocking again.
I think that there's something to be said for the time blocking where it's like, you even choose I can't remember who it was interviewed about. I think it was on Hidden Brain, something about like deep work. Like this guy will time block his whole month, and basically the time, that's just solid on the schedule, no negotiations. That's it. And part of that is just planning and priming. Like, okay, on Tuesday, the entire up until 2 p.m. is when I'm going to work on this deep problem. So there is this kind of confining of that. But I also yes, I like to get a lot of the deep work done early, but I don't really spend more than 15 to 20 minutes on any one task almost ever, in practicing. And so one of the reasons why is I find that at least in practicing, if you're working on song A, by the time, and you just push everything else aside, you work on just song A, then you feel like you've made progress on that. So you start song B. By the time you get to song C, A is fuzzy and B is a little bit out of the fingers, So there's something about the time blocking, but also when you're working on things to also just kind of switch it up as you're going. And then just instead of an hour spent on this one song at one time, I will spend an hour in 20-minute increments 3 different days. And so I make different progress. And so then I'm working on multiple levels of things at the same time. And it takes longer to do any one of those. But within 6-10 months, I have so many things coming to fruition, so many different projects or so many different things. So I think there's something to be said for, yes, have the deep work, immerse yourself in something like batching, but also while I'm filming, I'm batching little clips. I'm really not spending too much on each of them. I'm trying to do 70 videos in a session, so I'm constantly changing it up. And so sometimes I will allow myself to just completely go into the immerse land. And I think probably in the video editing, I like to get into that and the color grading and I don't put the timer on for that. But that's something to think about as well. Not just time block, but plan how the time block is going to go. Gotcha. Because then your brain is not like, oh, it doesn't feel heavy. It feels like you get to work on this. This is the stuff you want. You have a plan. And I just feel like that can be more productive.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot. Have you read Madeline L'Engle's book, Walking on Water? It's about creativity.
No.
It's great for any creative person if you like reading these types of books. And one comparison she makes that I really love is because, she wrote books that, we think writing songs and albums is a project. Writing books is like that's a massive task. And what she talked about was within each book, there's all these, there's plot lines, there's character development, there's all these little things, there's story arcs and stuff like that. And what she would do is she compared it to cooking, right? Like, okay, sometimes you've got a stove and it's got 4 burners and you've got 4 pots on it. And this one needs some stirring and then you have to let it sit.
Yeah.
And the letting it sit is sometimes, equally as important as the actual working on it, right? But then eventually, if you're doing it well and you're adding this to this and letting that sit and then paying attention to this one and paying attention to that one and switching back and forth, eventually all these things are starting, all this work that you're putting in is all starting to come together in the order that you wish it to come together. And I think that analogy was really powerful to me because as people who are creating an abstract thing,
totally,
we often are doing things where we're doing a lot of the work without seeing the results in real time.
Yes, yeah.
There's less tangible things. I know we've talked about, like, sometimes I'll go mow my lawn one day just to like be like, hey, there's a thing
I
I
done.
did,
I got something,
and I can see it being done.
Totally.
And as opposed to, okay, I planned to do this thing and I did a lot of the pre-production, but literally nothing's on tape.
Right.
Nothing's been recorded. It's just an idea at this point.
Yeah.
It's all abstract.
Yeah.
And so that was a really powerful analogy to me because we're doing all this work in advance that is productive and yet has no real-time reward. Yeah. That's so frustrating.
Yeah. I think that's I remember someone said to me once, one of my friends, I think his brother was like a professional violin player, my friend Henry. And his brother said to him once, like, you have to understand the difference between being productive and being busy because they're not the same thing. Yeah. And that, I think, yes, we are working on things that are intangible, and because they're intangible, there's all kind of justifications to think like, well, I did a good day's work, but like, when you have been productive in a way that's moved something forward, you know? And so I love that. Exactly. I do the same thing. Sometimes I get out of here and I'm like, I'm going to mow the lawn because I know here's what I did, you know? Yeah.
It's being in, I think in Atomic Habits, he calls it being in motion versus being in action. Being in motion is, you're flailing, you're doing a lot of things, but being in action is moving forward. Right. And having the awareness in the moment to be like, am I doing something that's important that's moving the ball forward? Totally. Or am I doing this little task on the side to avoid the thing that I'm scared of doing? Yeah. And for me, that's always been the problem, is big tasks that look scary, look like mountains, and getting that first step going is so tough for me. How do you balance, the craft of like doing a microphone? It is so interesting to me because you have to have a vision not only for what its capacity and potential could be, but then you have to go insanely detailed on the how, and then sourcing materials, and like, how do you keep the buzz going throughout that part of the process? Because that's probably similar to like, the idea of a song, you get excited about it, then you get into the refining and you just realize like everything is breaking apart and you're like, do I believe in this anymore? Yeah, the unfinished song folder problem. Yeah. I've got, I try and think about it like Madeline L'Engle, right? There's a bunch of steps to getting it from an idea in my head into the product that's sitting on the table right now. But there's some times where you just have to let the pot sit, and then there's other times. I feel like I definitely work in sprints at times, where I'll sit down, like a couple of days ago, we're releasing a new product called the V14, which is a high-end tube condenser microphone. And I sat down and I did all the 3D CAD and all the 2D engineering drawings and got it over to the manufacturer, a local guy in Pennsylvania, for a quote on what it would cost to laser out and fold this metal. And got it all done in like 3 or 4 hours.
Amazing.
And it was a sprint,
Amazing.
right? It was a sprint, but that is something that I needed to do for a while, but I wasn't quite ready to get there. So much of it is the planning and the, okay, these are the steps that I need to take. And then identifying what's the first thing I need to do. And then taking that and identifying what's the easiest thing I can do for that gets me going down the path. Because so much of it is overcoming the friction. It's like if you put your hand on this table right now and you lean forward and there's friction on it. And so much of the effort is breaking that first bit of and once you get it going,
then it
fine.
Keeps
sliding,
that's a good analogy.
Right?
Yeah.
So, in physics, there's that what does it take to overcome the force of friction, right? And the friction for me is my anxiety and fear and uncertainty and the imposter syndrome that we all feel, because none of us has any idea what the hell we're doing at any given time, right? We're all we're all just pretending.
Like,
so feel better
let's
about
try
yourself,
this.
right?
Let's see. Yeah.
So. And it's art, so that's the magic of art, is you don't necessarily have to know what you're doing. That's part of it. But so much of it for me is what you were talking about, being able to break down and identify the steps that I have to take to go from idea to gear.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also just like trusting that process, right?
We're at 59:19 on that camera, by the way. So I'm not sure if you need to to reset them at an hour or what. That one just hit an hour, I think.
Okay. I think we're good for now.
Okay.
But
I'll keep an eye on the blinking lights. You keep an eye on this blinking light, because that one's the one that's the largest. But yeah.
We can wrap or whatever.
No. I really like this conversation. I hope people that have actually made it this far, all three of you, I applaud you. So really quick, I want to talk about triplicity.
Sure.
And so you're doing, we just talked about how fingerstyle acoustic is a solo act a lot of the time.
Yep.
And now there's 3 of you fingerstyle guitarists, very accomplished ones, playing together at the same time, which feels
like it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah. Like, I know we talked about the fuzzy edges of fingerstyle acoustic guitar, but this certainly feels like it's beyond what we would consider the boundaries of it. So what inspired the project? How's it going? I know you guys have an album coming out soon, which I'm very excited about.
We have a couple of singles and then an album coming out. Yeah. I think as a solo endeavor, fingerstyle always aims to cover all the bases. Your bass notes, your percussion, your drums, all of that. Andy McKee is somebody that, I've just loved for years, as well as Callum Graham. Callum and I met, we were competitors at the Canadian Guitar Festival in 2009, 2010. And so we became buddies back then, and we were fans of Andy. And then we were all billed to play at a festival here in Philadelphia, I guess about 12, 13 years ago. And it rained out. So we just all went and had dinner, and we just had a wonderful time. It was great. And so we all became friends, and I would tour as Andy's support and tour manager sometimes, and sometimes Callum would be on the road with Andy. And then it came time for us, like, why don't we just all do a trio tour? So it was part of the Guitar Masters tour series we'd each play our individual sets. And then at the end of the night, we sit in on each other's tunes just to see what would happen. And again, because it's solo fingerstyle, we're used to covering all of the different aspects. And it's like when we would play the tunes at the end, we started with a tune from each of us. And it was like they're adding and finding room in things that I'd never envisioned in the songs. And so it was like it was becoming more than the sum of its parts. It was still the core emotional weight of the tunes, because I think all of those guys, those guys and me, I think we have like a common emotional experience of music, and I think that really helps weed out a lot of the, let me solo an E minor pentatonic for 3 hours. Like, we just don't have interest in that at all. Like, what is the song? And while we were recording, it was even like, I think I'm just going to sit out for this whole verse, and then I'll come in at this point. Whereas most guitar players are like, can I just take a solo from like minute 1 to 8? And So that project was born very much out of an organic mutual love of music and each other's tunes and respect in our friendship. And we laugh about everything. We're just like dad humor to the max. So I think there's like a real synergy, experience playing together. So we just decided from that chemistry, why don't we try to do a record? Mm-hmm. And from that idea, it became, could this be a separate entity? And so we've had a few managers, a few agents, and just trying to figure out
what's struggles,
a few, as
like
you know,
any artistic endeavor. Yeah.
It has been an absolute nightmare. So we're coming out of COVID. We have a new concept. Promoters are scared. They don't know, but we have all of these messages from fans saying, please get on the road with this thing. So what we're doing now is we're releasing a couple of singles. We have videos for everything. We have a course coming out with True Fire soon. Then we have the record coming out in April, and we're just excited to see what is the capacity for fingerstyle in an ensemble setting, because that's a new toy to play with. There have been, lots of great guitar trios and in the past, but specifically in fingerstyle, what is the capacity that this could be? Some of the elements are more in flamenco, some of them are in kind of I guess the new age, and then others are really, really heavy. This could be a death metal show. Some of the breakdowns, it's what are all of those new textures, and the power of a solo guitar times 3. Triplicity feels like it's its own entity that's starting to grow. And so I've just been, last couple of years just trying to bust my hump, trying to what's the best way to try to move everything forward. We worked with Corin Nelson, who's one of my dear friends. He Grammy winning producer, engineer, mastering engineer, and he's just a brother to me. And so having him on the project help all of us, so there was just a synergy of everybody in the room. There's not an ego. There's just what does the song need? And it's just really refreshing. I had such a great time working on the project. I hope the audience, can resonate with it as well, and convince all the promoters to take the risk,
Well, if you guys like the idea of a band, like a 9-piece band, but it's played by 3 people who can all play 4 instruments at once on one instrument, I think that's intriguing in its own right, because you all are used to playing everything yourself, and suddenly you're all doing that at the same time. I could see the difficulty in that, the potential of it to get really messy and cluttered really quickly.
Yep.
So I remember watching, I think one of the first ones you put out was Andy's Hunter's Moon.
Yes.
And you guys did, and Callum's just doing an EBO thing.
Yep.
And then you're counter rhythmic, counter harmony, or counter harmony type thing.
Yep.
And then Andy is still the star of the show.
Yep.
Because Hunter's Moon is fairly complex, right?
It's insanely
and a lot
dense
of the
already.
stuff that you guys do is in this record it's a cover. It's your tune. It's either you or Callum or Andy's song, and then the other people are adding texture to it. So I'm really excited to see them continue coming out. I've already seen a couple of them, and it's just a really cool concept, and it's I think unexplored ground to a degree, which is always interesting. Speaking of discovery and curiosity,
I think it feels fresh. I really love just the idea that what feels fresh to you as an artist that's the thing that will resonate and feel fresh to the audience as well. Hopefully, but it's important to make sure that that's important for us first. When we're sitting and listening to the mixes back, looking at each other, this feels really nice. That's a good feeling.
Yeah.
And the next week we have coming out shortly. We have another single, and then the record comes out in April. And next week is a tune that I composed for the group. Okay. And so this was one that was now let's take a step. We tried to do proof of concept in sitting in on each other's tunes. What does it mean to write?
Write for three,
exactly.
And that way it doesn't feel like you're shoehorning 2 other ones into something that already exists in its full-fledged form.
Yeah. So I brought an idea fairly, I think we changed a couple of the arrangement, the structure of it, but then those guys could come up with their parts. And the cool thing that I think we're exploring, that I'm really intrigued by this sound and exploring it more, is I play this guitar. A lot of times on this record, I play a guitar that's called it's Nashville tune, so it's a high strung.
Yeah.
And then Andy or Callum will be on steel string or baritone. And so you have a baritone register, you have steel string, and then you have the high pitch, and then sometimes kalimba's in there, and then you have ebow. Andy has electric guitar, and so we are trying to be full, but also stay out of each other's sonic space, and that is really interesting because the first mixes we got back, I remember I showed my wife, and she was like, I thought you guys you played on all of the tunes together, and I said we do. And I thought that was an interesting reflection. Like, it just sounded like an 18-string guitar. Like, it sounded like one guitar, which I was like,
right?
I thought that was such an interesting reflection because that's exactly what we wanted. We didn't want it to feel like a mess, you know? Then the challenge is trying to figure out how to do all of that live to make sure the clarity can come through. And that's a whole other thing that we've, we don't currently have, dates booked, but we have, done a decent amount of shows so far, but if we start to do the touring thing, that's the next hurdle to jump over to make sure we give the clarity of each of those parts.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
So let's get into the practical towards the end of this, and we'll do some quicker things. What's your favorite alternate tuning on a guitar? You can only pick one. The first one that comes in your head. You don't need to. I'm
going to be very boring. Standard, drop the whole step.
So just dropped a whole step.
I do it all the time.
What is it about it that you like?
It's like the sum of the, so it'd be like, standard D to D. There's something about the familiarity of the shapes. I already know where it can go, but I respond differently to hearing the same chord in a different register, So I know that sounds really boring, but like everybody's like, oh, sometimes just put a capo on, but it's like releasing the capo the other direction, going down a whole step. I just love it. And I use that on like maybe 4 or 5 tunes on the Triplicity record. Okay. There's something about it that feels I can complement the other parts. So if I venture past that, that's usually one of the first go-tos.
What's a fingerstyle technique that you feel like you are at the forefront of in comparison to other people?
Oh man. I'm really trying to understand what is the melodic potential between mixing open strings, artificial harmonics, and high fretted notes. And I know all of that sounds very complex, but you can color in a melody different ways. You can, like hot cross buns can just be on one string, or it can be on 3 different strings. And you can have a harmonic ringing one of those pitches while another one is doing something else. So the coloring in and how you bring, on piano, a middle C is a middle C, and that's what you got. And that's when that note is on the page, that's what you play. But you can play that multiple ways on guitar. And so where you position that. So that's something I've been exploring a lot with my last full-length record. And then one thing that I've been enjoying, I discovered this when I was we have a tune from Michael Hedges called Ursa Major that closes out the record. And I play a kalimba part, and I needed to do a harmonic with the left hand. And so there's been sort of strum harmonics you can do with the right hand, where you, guitar nerds, you'll know this, where you sort of put your index or, your middle, and then you can kind of like pick down. But I needed to do that all with just this hand, because if the kalimba's here, how do I get a harmonic and pick at the same time? And so I just was basically strumming and then used strum with the middle, and then the index was so it's basically a one-handed strum harmonic. I haven't seen that before. I'm sure it's been done, but it was one of those things that was like, I discovered it. It was new to me, and it solved that problem. And I was excited. Like, I wonder where else I could go with that.
Okay. So now's the oogie part where I have to be self-promoting, which always makes me feel a little gross. But so you record, and you actually did a video on your Instagram where you talked a little bit about your recording process. But for all the complexity that is fingerstyle acoustic guitar, you found a really simple way to record, which I think is great because that simplicity frees you up to focus on the instrument. So you really just use a direct and this guy right here. So tell me how you heard about the V44S. Tell me why you use it, what you like about it. Tell me what you hate about it, so for the Gen 3 I can fix it.
Sure. No. So this was one of the mics. This nylon string project is the first time I've tried this workflow with just this and then going direct. And then you kindly allowed me to, I just filmed a PBS special up in upstate New York, and I used a couple more of the mics, and I have to show you some of those mixes. They're just really, really sounding sweet. So I'm excited to expand I think for nylon string guitar, this is feeling great. For steel string, I'm going to need a few more sources just to pick up some of the stuff. But the workflow with this, in my mind, this was during the pandemic. I was like, you know what? I love the concept of a stereo mic, but it's never really been executed well. And I remember just like Googling, and then I came across this, and I was like, this. And I watched as many videos as I could find. I read the manual, and I was like, this is it. This is the thing. This is like, I love the concept of it. There's something about it. And I was already dreaming up, like, can I have one arm on the wall that carries the mic that's in front of my desk that I can immediately go into recording land as short as time as possible. So then I ended up getting one of these. I bought one of these. I think it was during the pandemic, or somehow Vintage King, I think I got through. So it was out of stock for a little while, and then it came back. I can't remember what the...
we're really good at not having stock. It's like part of what we're known.
Well, it was the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it was like I had no idea what you could get or not. And so I got this, and I just fell in love with the sound. And I used it on the Triplicity record. We recorded with this. We recorded our videos with it, and then I recorded, that was part of the setup, and then I recorded just solo into this. And then it was so interesting that this bizarre meeting of worlds that I somehow emailed you. I was trying to remember, or maybe we connected on Instagram.
I don't remember how it started.
You lived in California. All of a sudden, you're in Hatfield, Pennsylvania. So I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to. But
no, it's
fine. You're in southeastern Pennsylvania, and I'm like, but I am. And then we calculated one day over Instagram, like, dude, we're like right down the street.
We're like 40 minutes from
and
each
it
other.
blew my mind, because I arrived at this completely in love with the concept. And having working with it and then meeting you, it's like, and I told you this when we were recording this live concert for the PBS special, having your mics there in front and knowing the kind of person you are and the passion you put into the company, the care, the decisions that you make. It was just like, I was so proud to play how the mics are so great, but just knowing you, that makes it so great. And I'm not just saying that because, as a marketing pitch, like I just love how you handle everything. And I'm so glad to play this thing, man. I love it.
No, you talked about how the stereo mic had never been executed well.
Yeah.
When I think of that, the first thing I think about is the rotation mechanism. Right? Is that what you're thinking of when you're talking about stereo mics and the difficulty of it being executed well, or are there other things?
I think that's part of it. And part of it might be my ignorance. I mean, someone who's in the studios, like of the studios that I have been in over the years that have had stereo mics, every time we tried them, we're like, yeah, it's not doing it, Yeah. So maybe I was limited to my experience of the stock of what they were. But in general, I loved the idea of you could point a capsule at different angles, because that's how the guitar is, and that could give you a stereo signal, and then you don't have to have yet again all these extra, is there something about that could be good for workflow, but also insanely good quality sound?
Well, and phase relationships is so important.
Oh, totally.
Stereo miking, and having a mic that's in phase, unless you are right up at the very tippy top of it, in which case, technically you'll have some stuff out of phase, but even then it's going to be in frequencies that probably don't matter.
Right.
I think that the idea behind a stereo mic is to make stereo recording as painless as possible, because it can be very painful.
Yep.
Miking drums and measuring the snare from the top and worrying about the phase relationships of. Now, phase is the way we hear in stereo as human beings.
Sure.
How we hear spatially, right? So it's an important thing.
Yeah.
But the way we record is not the way that we hear.
Right.
Otherwise, we'd just all be using that Neumann. I think it's Neumann or
thing?
Sennheiser, the head. Yeah, the head. So, that's not how we record, and that's not how the mics hear. Yeah. So, I'm really glad you've done some really cool stuff with it. And if you guys want to hear this, it's on Trevor's new record, the Triplicity record, all over your Instagram. Because I feel like whenever you're one of the few artists that I appreciate very much, where you make an attempt to actually get the mic into the shot. I always joke with Aaron Sterling, who's a really popular drummer, but he'll play a song and he's always changing the setup of his drums and stuff like that. And you'll just see 1.5 capsules in the shot. And I've joked with him, like, I'm going to break into your house next week and I'm going to back your camera up 2 feet and then leave.
That's so funny because I have this thing where I'm experimenting with like doing the moving shots.
Yeah, I know.
And some of those, it's like the mic isn't in for a little while, and I'm like, I wonder if so. But I try to make sure it's
fine.
Featured. And one of the reasons why, because I love the way that, I mean, it just sounds good, of course, but I just love the way it looks, and there's something intriguing about how you can pan around into it. It just looks and feels.
Having a mic that doesn't look like something you'd pull out of like a garage workbench drawer, I think is an important thing to us. Like having something that's aesthetically pleasing, particularly in this age of video, where everything is being shot visually as well as recorded sonically. So being able to integrate both those was an important part of it. And me and Ken both like classic cars and that kind of like early aviation aesthetic and the minimalist Art Deco thing. So that all sort of got blended into what it is now. I just think from and there's times where you don't want the mic in the shot. We're making black mics soon because people have been requesting them forever. Because a lot of video guys are like, I love your mic, but I can't use it in my videos, my interview videos, or I can't, or whatever.
Interesting. Okay.
Or I can't use it live because it's so obnoxiously obvious and shiny. A bunch of the national orchestras in Europe wanted our V1s, and they said, we want them, but they need to be black because this is all broadcast live, and they need to blend in.
Interesting.
So we are making black ones in pretty short order.
That is so fascinating.
Just because some people need it for the function, right? Okay. And if I want function fashion to coexist, but if one of them has to win out, it should always be function. Totally. And I failed to do that on a couple of my designs. On the Lolly capsules, actually, we've gone through like 4 different versions of the metalwork to try and make it to where the badge lines up exactly on center.
Okay.
Because it looks really neat.
I love that Lolly. You came over before, and we just and I was the sound of it is so great. But the look of it as well. But you're saying that you have to make all these adjustments. To make sure
and they become more fragile. And finally, for this round, I said, screw it. When you screw on the Lolly, it is not going to line up perfectly with the badge on the mic. And that's just going to be how it is.
Right.
Because we've tried 4 different ways and none of them have worked well.
Yeah.
It's just time to give up on that dream, and function precedes fashion.
Yep.
So that's my view of it.
Yep.
Trying to think if there's any more big questions I've got on here, because we could go for another 3 hours.
We always do.
Oh, here's one. Let's close with this one. So every time you and I meet, I'm reminded how important it is to take away action items from really good conversations like this. And at the end of our 3-hour breakfasts that almost turn into lunches, we kind of say, okay, what's the one thing we want to take away from this conversation? Yeah. And I hope for the 2 people now that are still with us that you'll do the same thing, because this has been chock full of a lot of things that have been interesting to me. And if they're here, it's clearly been interesting to them because they've wasted an hour and a half otherwise at this point. So action item to take away from the conversation today. What is something that you pulled out where you say, hey, this week, I want to focus on this? I'll go first.
It's always hard for me. That's our pattern. Like I'm always like, I don't know.
I want to look at time blocking again, because I think that that's a really useful, important thing that... And for me, a lot of my paralysis comes from not knowing where to start. Yeah. And feeling like looking at the mountain and viewing it as a mountain instead of a series of steps.
Yeah.
So that for me is getting back into time blocking and making it flexible enough, because I have to be reactive in the later half of the day. Yeah. And I think that's where my failure was the first time, is being so rigid with it. Yeah. And it needs to be a flexible thing. You have to have both.
Yep. Spontaneous structure.
Yeah. Lao Tzu had some stuff to say about flexibility and versus rigidity, and how flexible people in the end tend to win out. So
the tree that breaks in the wind.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I would have to say that probably something similar. Like, I know that a lot of source of anxiety, I don't think that having a structured schedule and time blocking and having all of that is the perfect antidote to it. But I notice that when I'm not really like showing up to do the work that I know that I need to do, that's when I might get a little bit more comparative or insecure, like, oh, so-and-so has whatever views, or like, I'm just not getting this project, so I think what I would like to do this week, the action item, is just like really just sketch out and really get back into a routine. Right now, it's kind of been like, where are the fires, and trying to put those out. But I just need to, I think I want to block out the time again. And, the biggest thing is just getting back into a regular meditation routine. Cause that was I realized for so many years, again, it's not the magic thing, but oh my gosh, it's not hurting. It really helps.
It's it's the lubrication that helps overcome that friction force for me, at least. Cause I've been meditating every day for every morning for, not every morning, but most mornings for almost a year now.
Yeah.
And it's really changed my days as well, particularly when I come to it not as, and just like time blocking, it's not the end unto itself, right? It's just a tool.
Yeah.
And it's just a tool to help us organize the chaos that is the meat in our skulls, that is our brains, right? And organize our thoughts a little better and come into the day with a little bit more awareness. And then that way, when I start spinning out or when I start avoiding, I become aware of that avoidance before it's got so much momentum that it's much harder to stop.
Totally.
So that to me is where it really has come in handy.
Yep.
And a number of other things as well. It's got a number of benefits, but for me, just being aware of what's going on in my brain and not having my thoughts become these little dictators that define the course of my day.
Totally.
To borrow Dan Harris's expression for it.
Yeah. So, if you start off the day practicing a sort of self-compassion and like, it's okay. Everything else past just the feeling of breath going in and out of my body, that's just an added bonus. I'm okay with this. Then you get into reactive mode and get all these emails in the last half of the day and you're like, that's okay. Whereas if I'm not, I know that it just builds up and then I'm like, then I can more easily have the knee jerk anger or something. So,
well, we live in a world where the sympathetic nervous system is constantly getting stimulated by our phones and by design, right? Like by everything that's going on around us. It's just chaotic. And that lizard part of our brain gets on edge. So for me, the other thing meditation does is it gets me lower. That's part of my body a little bit lower. And that way, when it inevitably moves up, it ends up here instead of here.
Right.
So, because that's just going to happen. It's the world we live in. That's out of my control at this point. Unless I become a hermit in the woods, in which case it would be very difficult to make microphones. But, that I think that's a great action item to take away. Just, mine are like 5 minutes. 5-10 minutes is max is what I can do because I don't have the attention span for much more at this point. So, okay. Time blocking for me, meditation for you. Yeah. Whatever your thing is. So we'll wrap it there. This has been insert title here of this thing that I don't know what we're going to call it, but I'm going to try and do this once a month. Our next guest is going to be Steve Jinowick, who's a very, very well-heeled audio engineer.
Wonderful.
Worked with Al Schmidt for many, many years, and his credits list is as long as it would go around this studio several times, So really looking forward to that one. So that's a little sneak preview for you guys. But
awesome.
Thanks
for having me. It's always great hanging, and I know we will continue to have our breakfasts, and it's great to finally record one of our conversations.
So Trevor Gordon Hall. What's the name of the new record that's coming out?
Of Triplicity. The nylon string record is called Light Through Colored Glass. That'll be out later this fall. I've been releasing the singles, and then Triplicity is the self-titled album that's coming out right in April, just a couple weeks.
And there's the Vanguard V44S, but you know that if you're watching, probably. So, Thanks very much.
You got it.
All right. Always an awkward ending. Never know how to end these things. And scene. Perfect. There we go. Red button.